all for one or one for all, something like that. Let's have a look at how the various pieces of the Mishkan come together. Is it all just to give value to the Mishkan, or do they have value in themselves? The Rebbe says, we've discussed numerous times with regards to the names of parashas, that the nature is that that whatever the main theme of the parasha is represented by the name given to that parasha, and that must apply to our parasha as well, as the name Vayakhel, that the name Vayakhel represents the primary theme of the first of the two parashas, whereas the name Pekudei captures the essence of what the second parasha is all about, although they actually don't seem to work that way. In fact, they seem to represent the opposite of their themes. And it's going to appear to us that actually the theme and message content of the parashas doesn't match their names. And in fact, not only do they not fit, as we're about to explore, they actually seem to be the exact opposite. The name is the exact opposite of the theme and content. So what do we mean by that? Well, let's first understand the name Vayakhel. The Pirush from Vayakhel Kipshuto is, the simplest understanding of Vayakhel is, the Asifa v'Kibbutz from Kama v'Chami Yechidim ad Pratim. Vayakhel means to congregate a whole lot of disparate individuals or things that come together into a communal space. Und der Unterschied zwischen dem Lashon Vayakhel and what distinguishes the word Vayakhel legabe andere Lashonos was bezeichnen das Einsammeln kam Yechidim Pratim, compared to other words that seem to say the same thing, bringing detail or individuals together into a group. For example, Asifa, Kibbutz, Lekita, v'Chadoime, which are all words that imply gathering. Was steht in dem, was die andere Lashonos bringen heraus nach dem zu neuf kleiben. It's because any of those words, Asifa, Kibbutz, Lekita, only talk about the action of bringing together. Whereas, mentioned like for example, assembling a whole lot of people in a particular place, or a whole lot of concepts into a similar idea. But in any of those words, even after you've gathered all of those things, could well be that all of the things you've assembled into the same place or into the same objective actually retain their independent identity. So kibbutz, bring a whole lot of people together. Likud, a whole lot of pieces of wheat, for example, etc. You're bringing them together, but they all still retain a personal identity. Dagegen der Lashon Vayakhel meant, whereas Vayakhel means gemacht hakol. You take a whole lot of individuals, and out of them you create a community. That means batzeichen dem klal anoshim protim nit v'atzir von kama protim nifrodim. That emphasizes not just simply the matter of a whole lot of individual elements that come together in the same place or to share the same objective. Nit v'atzir von kama protim nifrodim. It's not just gathering a whole lot of separate things. Nor v'zeyala zusammenwerden anayim etzius akol echod. Except what's going to happen now is you now have a community. Prior, you had a whole group of individuals. Now you have a community. That's the implication of Vayakhel. That means the entire status of the group has changed fundamentally. So Vayakhel has a unique meaning of bringing individual elements together to become a new communal entity. By contrast, Pekudei, was Pirush is Moshe Minyan, Pekudei represents counting, that highlights the fact that everything remains distinct from each other. Because that's how you can count things, when they stand independently of each other. You can't count a community because a community is an holistic reality. So Vayakhel is taking individual things and turning them into a communal entity, and Pekudei is about keeping their identity by numbering them all individually. If that's the case, it doesn't make sense. The theme and content of the two parashas seems to contradict their names. Because beide parashas reden wegen Asiyas HaMishkan v'Hakelim, as we well know, Vayakhel and Pekudei speak about putting together the Mishkan and all the components that were required in order to do that. But there's a fundamental difference between the two parashas. Because parashas Vayakhel read wegen der Asiyah von kol chelkei protei in Yonei HaMishkan. Vayakhel tells us how they put together all the different components in order to produce a Mishkan. And that means the Arios b'fnei atzmam, the covers were one element, Kroshim b'fnei atzmam, the walls and the panels of the walls were a different element. And then all the different pieces of so-called furniture that went inside the Mishkan for use in the Mishkan, like the menorah, the shulchan, etc., that were all separate. So that emphasizes the fact that they are separate things, right? The Chiddush from Parshas Pekudei b'negei Melechas HaMishkan, whereas Parshas Pekudei, when it talks about working in the Mishkan, noch der Akdama des Sachakel von Zav v'Chesed v'Nechoshes, after Pekudei first gives us an introduction, which is an audit of all the materials that were collected in order to make the Mishkan. Kommt al Samaymer HaMuska Sima Mesuper in Parshas Vayakhel. And then you have kind of a parenthetical reference to the last nuts and bolts of putting together the Mishkan, the Sipur von Asiyas Bigdei Kehuna, and the last details about making the uniforms of the Kehanim. But then the primary thing that Parshas Pekudei talks about is the fact that everything was now, so to speak, complete, and therefore everything was then brought to Moshe. And then Moshe was given the instruction to put all of those things together to form the Mishkan mit kol kelav, the Mishkan and all of its elements, zusammen mit alle seine avodas. Plus we're going to learn about all of the avodas that had to happen. And that's all mentioned in like a broad sense of Moshe hat das getan befehl als zusammen, and the fact that Moshe then did it, in other words, he put the Mishkan up, Ha'akdama ve'ha'avodas, and then he worked initially in the Mishkan to do the first avodas, bis is geworden ein ganze Mishkan und kvod Hashem moles Mishkan, with a result which is now there's a complete holistic communal entity called the Mishkan, which is working. So it sounds like Vayakhel is emphasizing the individual components, and Pekudei, the final cohesive collective product. So the Fizeh, that would indicate that the names of the parashas and the themes of the parashas are opposites. Parashas Vayakhel is Mishkan. What Parashas Vayakhel says in context of the Mishkan is the Protei V'Chelkei Mishkan, all the detail as details, independent details. Each detail independent of the other details. Which does not sound like Vayakhel. Vayakhel is pulling everything together into a new holistic reality. On a Parashas Pekudei is that Tzir v'Chibur for the Ala Pratim, whereas Parashas Pekudei, that's where you find everything coalescing into a single entity. Where all the different disparate elements now coalesce into a single entity called the Mishkan, which is like a kohol. Which is the opposite of the message of Pekudei, which is to count. Which means you count each thing independently. So what's going on over here? So, we're going to try a really simple, low-hanging answer, and that is the Pirish from Vayakhel in Pshuti Shel Mikra. When we say Vayakhel in the simplest translation, we're not talking about the gathering of the pieces of the Mishkan or the components of the Mishkan, but rather it's the gathering of the people in order to make the Mishkan. That's probably how we all understood the pasuk. And therefore we could explain the connection between Vayakhel, which represents Hashem De'akol von Eden, that all the Jews come together to collaborate on building the Mishkan, that fits with all the details, even though they're very specific details of this part of the Mishkan, that part of the Mishkan, because the whole point is the people worked collaboratively together as a single group. The union from Vayakhel, so we'll say that Vayakhel, the fact that the Jewish people coalesced into a single community is was a prerequisite in order to make the Mishkan. In order that the Mishkan should be something that services and belongs to the entire Jewish community, as the pasuk indicates in Truma, that the purpose of making the Mishkan is that the Eibusha should dwell together with all of the Jews as a united entity. So therefore, in order to make that happen, the contributions and donations of every single individual Jew had to happen in a way that it wasn't my personal money going into the budget. In other words, money that comes from a whole broad group of millions of individuals. Truth is, it wasn't even going to be good enough to say that there are a whole lot of people who are now partners in a shared enterprise. A million, or in this case, a few million individuals who had all become partners in the construction of the Mishkan, but rather In order for the Mishkan to happen, you needed a Vayakhel. The people had to become a community. Therefore, the funds had to be communal funds, and then you could have a Mishkan that belongs to the people, and the Mishkan could dwell with the people. And therefore, is the Akdama Lezeh, the preparation for the Mishkan had to be to Neif Zamran Alidin Yechidim or Machem von Zein Kol. You had to bring all the Jews together and turn them into a community, and that's what Vayakhel means. That would be a great answer, right? Well, it would only help for Vayakhel. We still would not understand how Pekudei is a suitable name for the parasha of everything coming together as a community. How could you call the parasha Pekudei, which means counting, if actually the parasha is not the counting, it's the total? And the truth is, even to say that Vayakhel is given that name because it means the people came together so that you had a communal effort to build a Mishkan, it's actually not a good enough explanation for why that parasha is called Vayakhel. Because as we know, the Torah is absolutely precise to the nth degree. Therefore, we have to conclude that the name of anything, under all circumstances, is supposed to encapsulate what the energy and theme and essence of that particular thing is all about. That has to apply. If it applies to everything else, it certainly has to apply to a parasha. In our context, Vayakhel as denomen drikta is not the hagdama zum teichen oikri von dem sedra. We can't argue that Vayakhel is called Vayakhel just because it speaks about the preparation to what the parasha is going to speak about. Rather, Vayakhel has to represent the entire theme of the entire parasha, which includes all the elements of the Mishkan, and we don't yet know how Vayakhel could represent all these individual elements of the Mishkan, so we're going to have to delve deeper. In order to do that, we're going to borrow something that the Rambam says, which initially to us might sound a little bit complex, but we'll unpack it. Wenn wir das verstehen, behaken, was man der Mitzvah von Binyan Beis Hamikdash sagt der Rambam, so we'll understand by first examining how the Rambam defines what the mitzvah is to build the Beis Hamikdash in Sefer HaMitzvahs, not in Mishnah Torah, but in Sefer HaMitzvahs he says as follows: Shetzivonu livnois Beis HaBechira, that the Eibusha commanded us to make a chosen house for him, la'avoida. So it's a place that should be designated for service of Hashem, which means that's when you're going to bring karbanos, and that's where you have a fire that's always burning for Hashem. And that's what the pasuk means when it says, "Make for me a sanctuary." So far, so good. But then the Rambam adds something which seems to complicate what he's saying. This overarching concept of the Beis Hamikdash, Kolel Minim Rabim, has many individual components to it. All the other elements of the Mishkan, or the Beis Hamikdash, they are all part of the Beis Hamikdash. V'hakol yikore Mikdash. And all of that together, that's what we call Mikdash. Whoa, hang on a second. So is the Beis Hamikdash the structure? Doesn't sound like it. Sounds like the Rambam is saying the Beis Hamikdash is the structure, plus all of the individual components that belong inside the structure, including movable items like the menorah, shulchan, and mizbeach. V'hakol yikore Mikdash. All of that is called Mikdash. Ukfar yichad atzivu b'chol chelek v'chelek. And in addition to that, the Eibusha gave specific instructions for every part of the Mishkan. Sounds like there's a lot going on over here, and we need to understand. Darf man verstehen. If the Rambam wants us to know that the kelim, the vessels of the Beis Hamikdash, are considered part of the greater reality called Beis Hamikdash, they are components of a greater reality, which means they all form part of how you fulfill the positive mitzvah to make a mikdash for Hashem. That's fine, we get that. Why then does the Rambam continue and add that each of these things has its independent instruction? Didn't you just say that all of those things together fulfill the overarching instruction of Asin and Mikdash? Why are you now complicating things by saying the menorah has its instruction, the shulchan has its instruction? That actually seems to be saying the opposite of what the Rambam wanted to convey. It actually sounds like now the Rambam's telling us that every piece of the Beis HaMikdash is independent. So one second. First you said Hakol Yikare Mikdash, the entire thing with all of its components. That's one big overarching reality called Mikdash, addressed in the instruction of Asin and Mikdash. And now you're saying differently. Each one of them is actually independent. So which one is it? And really, what practical difference will we extract from the Rambam adding this extra information? In order to understand this, we have to look at three possible ways in which this could all work. When I say this, before we get to the details of the Beis Hamikdash and its components, let's look generally speaking how different elements coming together, there are three different possibilities of what that means. In the Shaykhs zwischen die Klei Mishkan mit dem Mishkan, when we're looking at the vessels or elements of the base of the Mishkan with regards to the Mishkan itself, there are various ways that we could learn how they interact. And this will fit into a general question about how detailed elements belong to a broader reality. Okay, so let's say we have a klal, we have a general principle or a general concept, general entity, and then we have the details of it. Three possible ways that works. The first possible way. Jeder von den Pratim ist nicht kein Metzias bifnei atzma. It is possible that you have individual elements that have no value of their own. Sein ganzer Metzias ist nur was durch die Sachtus kulam yochad wird ein Metzias der Klal. Their only value is when you put them all together and then they become part of the broader greatness. So let's say you have bricks. Bricks don't necessarily have a value, but once it's a house, then the bricks have created value. Benusach acher, put it differently, the Metzias HaPratim is not a hechsher to the Metzias HaKlal. In other words, the fact that these individual things exist is only a preparation that there should be something more meaningful. Words are not necessarily valuable. Words put into sentences, paragraphs, stories, those are valuable. We'll see an example in Halacha. The Geder von Chatzi Shiller das Shlokish. So there's the whole debate on Shabbos and other times where a person only does half of what the Torah would consider somebody liable for. So they do less than the amount. Chatzi Shiller. So instead of eating a kazayis, you eat half a kazayis of a forbidden food. Or you only do half of the melacha of Shabbos, as an example. So according to Reish Lakish, as Chatzi Shir mutar min Torah, if a person only does part of the transgression, it's actually no transgression at all. The Torah would allow it. In other words, half a shir, half a kazayis of non-kosher has zero transgression value. But now take two half kazaysim and put them together, something new happens. And now there's a new status which is forbidden status. In other words, it is possible for something that in and of itself doesn't have any value, but put it together with something else and suddenly it has a value. That's option one. The prat has no value. As part of the klal has a value. Option two, base. But there's another way we could say, actually every detail is of value in its own world to a certain extent. But when you put a whole lot of individuals together into a group, in addition to their own value, they now create a greater value, which is greater than the sum of the parts. As long as they were individuals, they didn't have this new value. Very easy example, the concept of a minyan. We know that every single Jew is holy. As a prat, as an individual, you have holiness. But when 10 holy Jews assemble, they now generate a new and higher holiness, which is greater than each Jew multiplied by 10. And that's why now we can say certain things we couldn't normally say without this group of 10 people. We can't learn from the Torah, we can't say Kaddish, can't say Kedusha. Put the people together, now there's the platform to achieve these great spiritual things. Okay, so the first possibility is the prat has no value, but it creates a value called the klal. The second possibility is the prat has value, but the value grows exponentially when the prat becomes part of the klal. The third possibility is gimel di pratim zaynikim etzis chshuva yedre farzich, that each prat, each individual thing has value, but not really proper, dignified value. But when you put together the individuals and create this broader, greater reality, not only do these individuals now create something new, there's a minyan, previously there wasn't a minyan, and now there is, but actually they add value to themselves as well. They get elevated to a whole different status. And we might want to say that that's how it works in the Mishkan of the Beis Hamikdash. So if I had a look at the various components of the Mishkan of the Beis Hamikdash individually, before the Beis Hamikdash or the Mishkan is complete and therefore is not yet a fully holy place, so there's no Kedusha of the Mishkan in the world yet because it's not finished. Over Mela is nitokin chalos kedusha from chotzer b'cholos. So therefore, there's no holiness in the chotzer or in the kodesh hakadoshim for that matter. But when you put all the pieces of the puzzle together, and now you have a complete Mishkan, not only is there now a finished product called a Mishkan, but that section of land that was designated as a Chatzar now becomes elevated. It is holy. Different places get different degrees of holiness. Meaning to say there's not only an umbrella holiness of this place as the holy Mishkan, but each segment gets each personal holiness. Fascinating, as the Kedushas HaChalokim bleibt afilu bin soev nifraka Mishkan. The fascinating thing is you can even now take the Mishkan apart, so you don't have this big umbrella holiness of the Mishkan, because you've packed it up and you're going, and yet those components remain holy. In other words, the holiness has become their reality, not just that they have the holiness when they play the role of the klal. Or when the whole Beis HaMikdash is chas v'sholom destroyed, the place is still holy. You could say that it's maybe only rabbinic, but that's not the point. The point is that there are three possibilities of how Kedusha works, or how the Prat and the Klal works. The Prat has no value, but it creates a Klal which has value. The Prat has a value, but it creates a new, greater value called the Klal, or the Prat has a value and it now upgrades its own value as being part of the Klal. We're going to take these three possibilities and plug them into the various elements of the Mishkan. So Aleph, one possibility. We could say that each individual component of the Mishkan has zero value and zero holiness to start with. But when you finish making all of the components of the Mishkan, or when you have now put up the Mishkan and you start to actually work in the Mishkan, and you bring in all the components, now the holiness begins. There's no value. It's like an unfinished Sefer Torah. There's no value, but once you have all the pieces together, there's this overarching value called a Mishkan, which operates using these components. But we could argue that there's no individual value to any one component of the Mishkan. Now, to be exactly the same as the different parts of a building. The boards that were used as the walls and the skins that were used as the roof, they could simply be considered only pieces that make a Mishkan. So if you have a house, you don't say each brick is valuable, you say the house is valuable. So perhaps in the same way, you don't say the Krushim and the Yerios are valuable, you say the Mishkan is valuable. But you can even extend it to the Kelim that a menorah has no value if it's not in a Mishkan. Just to put this into different words, the Geder Mishkan is in order to have a Mishkan, the definition of a Mishkan is a building, a structure that includes boards for walls and skins for roofs, and inside it has to have a Shulchan Menorah, etc. But those kelim don't actually have an individual worth and value. Much in the same way as the sockets, the walls, the poles, they don't have value. They are just to form a structure of a Mishkan. And when the Torah tells us that you're not supposed to watch when they're like packing up the Mishkan because it's considered disrespectful, that's like independent of the fact that it's not like because those kelim have value. So you're busy unpacking the Kodesh HaKadoshim, therefore technically the Aron actually has no holiness at this point. There's an independent mitzvah. Don't go there and watch it happening because it's considered disrespectful. Okay, so the first possibility is there's no individual part of the Mishkan that has a value. It is only the collective, the Mishkan, which includes so many pieces, that is valuable. Possibility one. Possibility two, base. That's a bit too difficult for us to get our heads around. Let's say that every part of the Mishkan is valuable and holy even before we start. The menorah is a valuable thing the minute the menorah is made. The menorah b'fnei atzma, the shulchan and the mizbachas, and the shulchan has value, and the mizbachas have value. But once you take that menorah, which is already a valuable piece, and you put it inside the Mishkan, something changes. It's now part of something greater than itself. It helps to complete the Mishkan. And therefore, like the Jew who makes the minyan, the menorah makes the Mishkan, and everything it achieves a higher purpose. Or you could say, third possibility, Gimel mitzadatzman beis hasiyasam, haben sie nicht chshivas mitzadatzman. We could say the menorah, the shulchan, the mizbachos don't actually have an inherent value, even once they have been made for the purpose of the Mishkan. But once there is a Mishkan and you bring these vessels inside the Mishkan, that's going to elevate each one of those components, not just as a piece of the puzzle called Mishkan, but they'll actually get value of their own. The menorah has a unique kedusha that only the menorah has. Shulchan v'chulei, likewise the shulchan, etc. Noisaf to the kedusha klolis al satel from kedusha mishkan bichlal. That's not just holiness because you live inside a holy environment and you're a piece of the puzzle of holiness, but you, the menorah, have independent personal value. Okay, so which one are we going to go with? Well, let's first see the practical difference. One possible difference in halakhic examination of the Mishkan, depending which angle we go with, would be as follows. We know very well when you build the Mishkan or later the Beis HaMikdash, it has to be built for the intention of you have to make, fashion all the different components of the Beis HaMikdash, of the Mishkan, including all of the kelim, for the purpose of this holy place. So the question is, what exactly does your intention have to be to qualify as lishma? If we go with the first view, which is none of those things have any value until there is a Mishkan, and then the Mishkan has value. As a Geda Kelim is not dos atel for Mishkan, which means the only greatness of a Klei HaMishkan is the fact that it belongs to the Mishkan. Well, then your intention has to be, when you're making the menorah, the shulchan, etc., you have to be saying, my intention is to make a Mishkan, because that's the purpose of these things, is to make a Mishkan. If we go with the second view, which is everything is actually of value, and when you put them together, you're going to get a greater result, which means that each individual keli already has value, like the Jew is already valuable before he gets to the minyan. So each keli has value even before it enters the Mishkan. Then is the lishma b'shas asiyas akli l'shem the kedusha pratis from the kli. Well, then when you're making the menorah, if you're making the menorah lishma, it means you're making the menorah for the purpose of having a menorah, etc. Right? Menorah shulchan chulei. And if you go with the third view, which is you don't really have value until you're part of the Mishkan, and then you have value that you could never have experienced before. Because when you make the various components and bring them into the Mishkan, not only have you now created a broad reality called the Mishkan, but you've also injected holiness into each individual component. Then actually when you make each individual component, you have to have a dual intention. Obviously you have to say, I'm making the menorah in order that there should be a Mishkan, because the menorah doesn't have its own chashivas to start with. But the menorah will then be transformed into something of incredible holiness and greatness. So therefore, when I make the menorah, I also have to have in mind, in addition to the general intention to make a Mishkan, the specific intention to make a menorah that will go into that Mishkan. And we can deduce from that, as those was the Rambam is Mosif noch dem wie sagt kulam mechelkei hamishkan v'akol yikarei mikdash. That's why the Rambam, after he tells us the broad statement that all of the different components belong to the Mishkan and they're all called under the banner of the word mikdash, then he adds ukvar yichad atziva b'chol chelek v'chelek, that the Eibishter also gave a unique instruction for each part of the Mishkan. Why does he do that? Melamdeinu, because he wants to teach us as choch zeh haklal mitzvos vasil mikdash kolol minim rabim, that yes, it's true that the mitzvah to build a mikdash includes in it many, many details like the various kelim. As the tzivah vasil mikdash meint milchatchila to machen hamishkan vas is kolol kelim, that the Eibishter's instruction, make for me a mikdash, means make for me a structure that will have all these individual components inside it, is ober. But once that Mishkan has been made, then each element of the Mishkan now actually has its own specific intention and therefore its own specific instruction. And therefore each component now is elevated and graduates to have its own unique type of holiness. And therefore, the practical thing we said before, you've actually got to be aware of this, and you actually have to have that intention. And therefore, the Rambam says each one has its own tzivoy. When you make the menorah, don't just think about the Mishkan, although you have to, but think also about the specific keli, because it's going to shine once there is a Mishkan. Und das ist der Remes von Vayakhel, as Namen von der Seder. That's why Vayakhel is chosen as the name for the parasha, was Retzach wegen Asiyas Kol Chelkei HaMishkan, as the name of a parasha that speaks about so many details, separate details. Because Vayakhel is a remes of an oifen asiyas hakelim. Actually, it turns out that the word Vayakhel alludes to how you make those kelim. This is the parasha that describes them making the kelim. Vayakhel contextualizes how they made the kelim. In other words, as die Piola von Meleches HaMishkan v'chol Keilav is given ba'oifen von Vayakhel. We need to be conscious of the fact that how the Mishkan and all of its individual components was made was with the intention of Vayakhel. Das heißt, meaning, even though in Parashas Vayakhel it keeps saying the word Vayas, and they made X, and then independently Vayas, they made Y, they made a Shulchan, they made a Menorah, etc. So that might sound like everything is quite separated. Is the kavona basias kol kriuchlin it given nor al sasio upiula protis. The Vayakhel reminds us that when they made each component, the intention wasn't simply, oh, now the kavona is to make a menorah, now the kavona is to make a shulchan. Now, since given Vayakhel zu neuf geklimmen zusammen alle Chelkei HaMishkan, if machen ein Mishkan, there was an overarching intention. I'm making a menorah to make a Mishkan. The Mishkan is Vayakhel. It's going to pull all of these pieces together into a single entity. Because until you have the whole Mishkan with all its pieces, not one of the pieces has its own value yet. Sein ganze Inyan is das, was apart von dem Klal Mishkan. The greatness of each individual part is only realized when that individual part services the entire Mishkan. In Vayakhel-Pekudei, by contrast, where the Torah tells us that now they had completed all of the work needed in order to make the Mishkan. And now the Mishkan's complete. It's been put together and all the different elements are exactly where they need to be. And now you could see the value of each individual. Remember, we're going with a third possibility, which is that becoming part of the klal, step one, gives the prat value, that's step two. So Parashas Vayakhel tells us the intention. Each component has to be part of the klal. It has to be directed to becoming part of the Mishkan. And then once you have succeeded in doing that, and the Mishkan is complete, now the Pekudei, each individual has its own chashivas in and of itself. Now you can identify the value and the existence of each individual component. Not that the components are just lost in the bigger picture of a great Mishkan. They have value for being part of the Mishkan. Because as we've explained extensively, once you complete the klal, all of the pratim are elevated into a whole new value. The menorah is worth mentioning. The aron is worth mentioning. The kior is worth mentioning. So everything in Torah is eternal and carries an eternal lesson. How much more so if that's true of any part of Torah for sure. The Mishkan is considering that the whole purpose of the Mishkan is that the Eibusha should dwell within us. His move on as the Inyan Anal from Vayakhel-Pekudei. So this concept of Vayakhel being part of the collective, the higher purpose, and then Pekudei, because of that each thing being elevated into its own valuable role, is relevant to each of us and how we bring godliness into our lives. We know very well that we say the entire Jewish community is exactly that, a community. Take all the Jewish people, put us together, we become a single organism. Or then, if chas v'shalom one Jew isn't as whole as they should be, the entire structure is lacking. Yet on the other hand, we say that we're not just cogs in a wheel. Each Jew as an individual is a full universe. To the extent that the Gemara Sanhedrin tells us that every one of us is required to say, the entire existence was created for me. The ganze Welt, when we say the whole world, we don't mean planet Earth, we mean the entire spectrum of existence from the highest spiritual realm, including every other Jew, is bishvili nivra. Right? It's for me. And das is jeder eine mechuyev zu sagen, and it's not just a nice feel-good suggestion from a self-help book. It's a requirement in Judaism that we're supposed to think and say this. That means even a person who's on the lowest rung of spirituality, the so-called wood chopper or water carrier, whether the person is the greatest or the smallest, you have to say that about yourself. I am everything. So there's this paradoxical reality. We all contribute to an overarching organism called the Jewish people, and each one of us is so valuable. The Jewish people were created for us. And if them kommt darauf und die Shemes HaSeders, Vayakhel-Pekudei, to understand that paradoxical balance, that's where we get the value of these two parashas, Vayakhel-Pekudei. Because Aid ken doch trachten, a person could very well think as the Chol HaRosh is Emetzis Bifnei Atzmai. First and foremost is me, I exist, I count, and that's important. Or as they say, put on your own oxygen mask first, or always pay yourself first, or the various, self-help lines that people use. We're not talking about a person who says, I am an egotistic being. No, I'll say it. I'm a Jewish being, a holy being, and therefore a being that has to be considered. Eved melech melech. I am the king's servant, which makes me royalty. Because I'm here to serve the Eibishter. And therefore, if I'm here to serve the Eibishter, each person will think, I have my unique role to play. Okay, and then in addition to that, I also belong to the broader Jewish people. So first and foremost, I have to work out who I am, what I'm here for, and what I contribute to the world. And then I've also got to be conscious of the fact that there's more than just me, there's a whole Klal Yisrael. So we tell the person, when we were going to fashion the various individual components of the Mishkan, each of which had a critical role that no other part of the Mishkan could play. And therefore each one had to be fashioned completely independent from every other one. And that's why each time the Torah says Vayas, again, to show you clearly, this is a menorah. It has a particular set of qualities. It has a particular purpose that cannot be confused with the purpose of a shulchan. So Vayas, it's made in its own space. In spite of that absolute value of individuality, the Torah, which is Torah of truth, says, it's also from Vayakhel, that it's got to belong to the Vayakhel. In dem, was natel von dem ganzen Mishkan. Yes, the Mishkan, the menorah is so unique, but it's part of a Mishkan. The Aaron is so unique, but it's part of a Mishkan. A Jew has to know the same thing as the Aschola, that the outset, the defining reality has to be on a Kudas HaTeichem von alles lechol HaRoish, the core principle of everything, which is the first principle of everything, is I have to be part of the community. I have to be connected to all the other Jews in the world. To the extent that actually what gives me value is the fact that I belong to the community. Therefore, for that reason, it's for that reason that even before a Jew goes to ask Hashem for his own personal needs, and asking for personal needs is a positive mitzvah in Torah, the mitzvah to daven, first, before I can ask for what I need to be connected to every other Jew. We say at the beginning of the Siddur, first a person has to undertake the positive mitzvah to love every Jew like themselves. And furthermore, we say never separate chas v'shalom from the community. That's why even when you get to the point where you start asking for what you need, you never say it in the singular. We don't do that, just ask for ourselves. No, but Rabbim, all of our prayers are in plural. Please give us wisdom. Give us all the opportunity for tshuva. And that's the truth of all of the brachos, all the personal requests that we have in our davening are not personal requests, they're collective requests. So before I begin, I have to know I belong to the klal. That's what it is to be Jewish. There is no Jewish island. On the other hand, when a person does things on behalf of the community, he might think, okay, listen, right now I'm doing something for the community. It's not going to add in any way to my own spiritual development. My spiritual development will rely on the things that I do in my learning, my davening, my mitzvahs, etc. Now, the tzarech haklal is a mevater, is ein shleimus und tufaren klal. But, nebech, there's no choice. I belong to the community. I have to contribute to the community, so I'll take a personal knock in terms of my spirituality and my own development so that the community can benefit. Zokt menim, so therefore we tell him that's not how it works, as adrabah to the contrary. Der Aufstellen der Mishkan, dem Aufstellen der Mishkan for Klal Yisrael is an Anefim from Pekudei. When the Mishkan is actually built, meaning when everybody comes together, that's when the Pekudei happens. That's when jeder Klip Farzich in sein Havon is sein Havot zu Moshe. That's when everything comes to Moshe. Then noch Tzivah Hashem zu Moshe wegen der Kli, und then noch the Kim for Moshe in der Kli. And then there's the unique instruction of what the Eibusha tells Moshe to do with that individual vessel, and then the fact that Moshe does it. And each one is recognized individually and valued individually. In other words, when a person is contributing to the broader Jewish community, the person is valued more and benefits more as an individual. Why is that? Why we have to have this interaction with the rest of the community in order to get value. That when a person is doing their personal individual thing, it has to be with this consciousness and this attitude of Vayakhel. You've got to belong to and include yourself in the community. And on the other hand, simultaneously, das Aufstellen am Mishkan für ein Klal Yisrael ist Beifen von und bringt zu Pekudei. So there's this paradox. The human, the individual, has to contribute to the community, and the community will uplift the individual. Die Shleimus von Yadiden als Yachid. Why is that? Is weil be'etzem seinen Dibei de Inyonim bei Eden, because the truth in essence of a Jewish person is sein Vayakhel and sein Pekudei, the part that I play as an element of the community and the part that I play as an individual using my talents and unique contribution is einzach. It's actually one thing. Was der Fall ist, Berei Vashonim, seine Vayakhel-Pekudei Michuboris, was das weist as a very name Sedra. That's why Vayakhel-Pekudei is typically a joint parsha, because it's a joint Jewish status. If I'm looking at things from a superficial outward appearance, in the darga fun giloim, in the language of Hasidus, the parts of what can be revealed, then generally you'll say the broad picture, the big picture, and the individual are at loggerheads. And if they're not at loggerheads, then they're at least two completely different focuses. And so therefore, in normal thinking, if I talk about the value of community, I'm automatically undermining the value of the individual. And likewise, the more I value the individual and the needs of the individual, the more I'll be limiting the value of the community. That's if you look at things superficially. But when you look at the essence, the inner reality, the truth of a Jewish person, which is that every Jew is suitable, and we're all the children of a single Father, Hashem. And the reason for this is because that's how it is in Hashem's essence. Is the Rabbi the fact that there is so much diversity in the world does not contradict Hashem's so-called simple essence. Why not? Das heißt, Says da Rabbi Vayischalkus, aber nicht nur ist der Rabbi nicht bestillt zu der Pshitas. Not only is the diversity and complexity of the world not a contradiction to the simplicity of Hashem's essence, no adirabba, the Rabbi Godel dicta is the Pshitas de la Maila. The fact that there's so much, that indicates Pshitas. Okay, how does that work? Well, perhaps an easy way to understand this is when something is very simple, it can diversify. White light can be shone through a prism and become 7 different types of light. 7 different frequencies of light. Why? Because of its pshitas. But if you took red light and you put it through a prism, it wouldn't become a rainbow. So it's dafka when you're dealing with the essence of something which is uncomplicated. It's because it's uncomplicated that it can produce the broadest kind of diversity. Und spielt sich das ab als Kanal bei Jeden, and the same thing is reflected in the Jewish experience. Why? Because was Yisrova kutshabrichu kol echad, because we in the Eibishter are all one. As das was Jeden stellen zusammen an am echad. The fact that the diverse Jewish community, and let's be honest, 2 Jews, 3 opinions, you don't get a more diverse community. That we could become a single nation is die consider zu dem Metzius von Jeden als Yachid. It's not by neutralizing the individual value of each person. No, adra, but to the contrary. Because what unites Jews together is not a common slogan, a common purpose, a common language, or even a common religion. What unites us is the essence of a soul that belongs to all of us equally. And that singular shared soul that we all have is part of Hashem's essence. Therefore, we don't have to give up our individuality to be united. The unity between us expresses itself in our diversity. Because the essence of something is the essence of every part of that something. Your DNA is not more in your brain than it is in your toenail. Because it's your DNA, it's your essence. So the essence of Jewish unity is not more in the great scholar than it is in the simple person. It's equally across the board. So in the same way as we have this paradoxical reality of Vayakhel-Pekudei in each of us as people, you're going to find the same principle in our Sefer Torah. And this is in the practical development, like how you actually write a Sefer Torah. Because on the one hand, a Sefer Torah wird aufgestellt von hunderte Tausende besondere Oisies. In order to write a Sefer Torah, you have to have a few 100,000 independent letters. Und die alle Proteoses schaffen a Torah as Vayakhel. But take all of those independent letters together, as soon as the last letter is completed, it becomes a singular entity called a Torah. Not 300,000 entities, a singular entity called a Torah. On the other hand, when you have that single Torah with all its power and its holiness, in order for that Torah to be 100% kosher, every single letter has to be completely free of touching any other letter. It has to be surrounded by clear parchment all the way around it, so that it keeps its own identity. Same as the Jew, right? The Jew has to belong to the community first and foremost, and then recognize his value as an individual. Now, considering that we know the Jews, the Torah and Hashem are all one entity, so the same principle that we're learning in concept with regards to the Jewish nation applies in practice in the Torah. The Torah is a singular entity and each letter has to remain separate. That's the lesson, and that's the empowerment of this double parasha. It's a parasha that empowers us to speed up and to be more enthusiastic about creating Jewish unity, which includes a unique form of unity, which is relevant, or at least was relevant at the time the Rebbe said the Sicha in the early Mems. Durch dem, was jeder wird haben aus in einer von den Sefer Torah Klolim, that every single Jewish person, practically for unity, should own a letter in the unity Sefer Torah that were written at the time and that still exists today. Welche werden gestimmt zu dem Achet seiner Lieden zusammen, Sefer Torah that are written with the purpose of bringing the whole Jewish community together. Und was all die sehr wird, die Schleimus von jeden als Prat Vayochid, which not only will make us all part of a communal effort, but will make each of us part of something which is valuable to us as individuals. It reveals the personal, unique connection that each Jew has with Torah. Und sein in der Sefer Torah durch dem Os Vaserot in their Sefer Torah, and each person now has their place in that Torah because they have that letter in the Torah that belongs to them. And the Shleimus von Am Yisrael als Klal Ein Kol, and simultaneously, of course, that brings this unity of the entire Jewish nation. And it brings the truest form of unity, because Torah is the truest form of unity and also the most eternal form of unity. That will definitely hasten the coming of Mashiach. When Mashiach comes, it will also be a personal geula, not just that the nation is liberated, but rather that the Eibush is going to take each person literally by the hand, as Rashi says. Like the pasuk tells us, that you will be gathered literally one by one, Jewish people. And when each individual is taken out of Golus, that will naturally create a communal geula, kahal gadol yashuva heina, as the pasuk says, a massive community will return back to Israel, to Yerushalayim, b'meheira v'yameinu mamash. It should happen immediately.